A big dig is getting underway in Poland in search of a mystery train filled with treasures buried at the end of World War II.
The Polish government has gone ahead and had the site cleared. Now the army is checking for Nazi booby traps.
The end of World War II left not only visible ruins. All of Europe was riddled with secrets, silences and hidden riches. The fall of the Third Reich not only entailed the collapse of its military machine, but also the dispersal of an enormous amount of looted assets: gold, foreign currency, confiscated art, and valuables systematically extracted from the occupied territories. While in Germany, the Reichsbank moved its contents to the depths of the Merkers mine to protect it from the Allied advance, other routes began to be plotted away from the immediate front. With defeat ever closer, the regime dispersed its wealth through unexpected channels. Some were recorded in military archives. Others survived only as persistent rumors. In southwestern Europe, Spain became a discreet corridor. According to documents declassified by the United States War Department between 1942 and 1945, more than 150 tons of Nazi gold crossed the Aragonese border via Canfranc, transported in Swiss trucks to central banks in Madrid and Lisbon. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, a little-known story survived the passage of time. In 1944, after the bombing of a bank branch in Arnhem, German soldiers stole jewellery, watches and ingots, which were buried on the outskirts of the village of Ommeren, according to documents revealed decades later. The discovery of a hand-marked map reignited a frantic search years later. For days, that peaceful rural spot was invaded by searchers armed with metal detectors. What seemed like a forgotten echo of the war came back to life. Meanwhile, to the east, Poland became the setting for one of the conflict's most enduring legends, the story of a Nazi train that allegedly disappeared into the Silesian tunnels with a priceless cargo. This documentary conducts a rigorous investigation into how the wealth of the Third Reich was dispersed and what ultimately happened to it. The best-kept secret of Nazi banking. On the morning of February 3, 1945, Berlin was rocked by one of the most devastating bombing raids of the war. Among the many targets hit, one of particular importance was the imposing central building of the Reichsbank, the most powerful financial institution in the Third Reich. Located in the heart of the capital, the state bank had so far withstood the ravages of the conflict, but that day it suffered at least 20 direct hits. The building, comparable in size to the former chancellery, was partially destroyed. Inside, more than 5,000 employees had taken refuge in the bank's basement. When the bombs began to fall on the structure, the darkness, dust and roar caused scenes of panic. The lights went out, the walls shook as if made of paper, and screams of terror mingled with the crash of the collapse. Despite the violence of the attack, there were no fatalities. The bank's president, Walter Funk, would later recall that escaping that shelter alive was an act of pure luck. After the bombing, the building had a ghostly appearance: cracked walls, smashed furniture, and smouldering papers among the rubble. But the most worrying aspect was that although the exterior structure had been severely damaged, the vaults remained intact. Inside them lay a considerable portion of the Nazi regime's fortune: gold bars, foreign currency, precious metals, bonds and cash. The vulnerability of this treasure set off alarm bells among the bank's management. Since 1939, the Reichsbank had been under the direct control of Adolf Hitler. That year, economist Hjalmar Schacht was dismissed for his disagreements with the regime's economic direction and replaced by Walter Funk, a more accommodating man with no real knowledge of banking. In practice, management was left in the hands of Vice President Emil Pohl, who, despite foreseeing German defeat, chose to remain loyal to the system. It was Pohl who orchestrated the storage and redistribution of Nazi gold. During the war, the Reichsbank accumulated precious metals from numerous occupied countries. More than $2 million in gold was taken from Czechoslovakia. From Hungary, 32 million. France, through the Belgian loot stored at the Banque de France, contributed 200 million. Even when the Germans withdrew from Italy, they took another 100 million with them. It is estimated that, at their peak, the Reichsbank's reserves reached $500 million at the time. Much of these funds were redistributed throughout Germany. Even so, Berlin remained the main hub for this looted wealth. While the smoke still rose over the remains of the German central bank, the Reich authorities acted swiftly. The transfer of personnel and financial assets became a top priority. The decision was clear: evacuate the main departments to Weimar and Erfurt, while state securities would be transported to a more secure location, hidden underground. The chosen destination was a potash mine in Murkers, in the state of Thuringia, more than 300 kilometers from Berlin. On February 9th, the first convoy departed. 1,000 sacks filled with paper money, equivalent to 1 billion Reichsmarks, accompanied by foreign currency, including more than 4 million in US banknotes, headed for Merkers. 3 days later, it was the gold's turn, about 100 tons, with an estimated value of more than $200 million at the time. The transfer occupied 13 freight cars, and unloading took 3 full days. The ingots were stored in what was known as Hall 8, a chamber located deep within the Kaiserode mine. For weeks, this vast fortune remained hidden beneath the surface of the Thuringian plain. But the calm was short-lived. At the end of March, the forces of the American Third Army, led by General Patton, crossed the Rhine and began a lightning advance eastward. On April 4th, they reached the Merkers region. The German attempt to move the gold back to Berlin failed. The railway was paralyzed, and they were only able to salvage a portion of the paper money. The remaining 500 sacks were abandoned in the tunnels. The fall of Merkers went unnoticed at first, but 2 days later, an unexpected event changed the course. 2 American military police officers, patrolling in a jeep, offered help to 2 displaced women. During the journey, one of them pointed out the mine entrance and revealed that the Reich's gold was inside. This information was quickly confirmed by other witnesses, including British prisoners who had been employed in the unloading process weeks earlier. On April 7th, a unit from the 90th Regiment descended into the mine. What they found exceeded all expectations. Piles of sacks containing paper money, gold ingots, jewelry, and other valuables lined the underground passageways. The main chamber, protected by a brick wall and a steel door, was finally blown open with dynamite. Inside, the financial heart of the Third Reich lay intact. This descent into the mine was no simple inspection. The American officers entered a cavern dug out of salt of colossal dimensions. The first thing they saw were more than 7,000 sacks arranged in meticulous rows. Inside, each one contained gold coins or ingots, with an average weight of between 25 and 35 kilos each. More than 8,500 ingots and a mass of coins valued at over $126 million were counted, including Swiss francs, French francs, and hundreds of sacks containing $20 pieces. A bank official captured in the area, Dr. Werner Weich, confirmed that the loot included coins from nearly a dozen countries. In addition to the gold and cash, the soldiers found hundreds of tons of archives and artwork. In an adjoining gallery were more than 400 tons of canvases from German museums. There were pieces by Rembrandt, Van Dyck, Titian, and Dürer. A priceless Egyptian sculpture was also found, a small statue of Queen Nefertiti. The find was so significant that Eisenhower, Patton, and Bradley personally descended to inspect it. Amid joking and tension, the generals toured the tunnels guarded by their troops. Patton mocked the found art while Eisenhower inspected the bundles of Reichsmarks intended to pay an already crumbling army. Despite security measures, General Patton insisted on evacuating the contents. On April 14th, the transfer to the Reichsbank headquarters in Frankfurt began. 32 trucks, armed escorts, air cover, and night surveillance were required. In total, 11,750 containers were moved. Although the operation was completed without incident, rumors circulated for years about a truck that had disappeared en route. 2015, the radar that found the Nazi gold. While the treasure found in Merkers was being transported under Allied control, one of the most persistent legends of the end of the war began to take shape in southern Poland. According to various versions passed down since 1945, a Nazi armoured train had departed loaded with hundreds of tons of gold, jewels, weapons, and looted works of art. The convoy was supposed to continue westward, but never reached its destination. The most widely held theory holds that it was deliberately diverted onto a hidden branch line, possibly connected to a mine or to tunnels dug beneath a castle in the region. This location, linked to the unfinished and enigmatic Ries project, would eventually become the focus of speculation, searches, and rumors for decades. During the communist regime, between 1947 and 1989, Polish authorities carried out numerous fruitless searches. However, the story persisted thanks to Tadeusz Słowikowski, a resident of Wałbrzych, who dedicated his life to investigating this supposed train. He first learned of its existence in 1950, when he was barely 20 years old. His motivation wasn't just historical. His mother had died at Auschwitz. Shortly after the war, he saved a German man named Schulz, who in gratitude told him about an underground passage near a railway line. Another witness, a train worker, claimed to have seen rails entering a tunnel that was soon sealed off. He stated that he remained silent for decades out of fear after witnessing the execution of a family living next to the track. On May 5, 1945, just before the arrival of the Red Army, the inhabitants were shot and the house razed to the ground. From the highest window, Słowikowski said, the movement of trains entering and leaving the area could be clearly observed. That house has remained uninhabited ever since. Over the years, Słowikowski created detailed models of his theory, 2 parallel tracks crossing hills, with a detour leading to a hidden tunnel. But he wasn't allowed to investigate until 2003. When he did, he suffered harassment. He was threatened by armed men, his dog was poisoned, his house was attacked, and his telephone line was sabotaged. According to him, it was all the work of old-fashioned Secret Service methods. He suggested that the train could have been hidden in one of the many mines recorded on period maps, some of which are likely still mined. This version echoes that of Magdalena Woch, director of Książ Castle, who asserted that other hidden trains containing artwork or classified documentation could exist. The mayor of Wałbrzych, Roman Zelime, himself acknowledged that the region remains a haven of secrets. Słowikowski's testimony and the suspicions surrounding the underground complex at Książ Castle had kept the legend alive, but it wasn't until the summer of 2015 that the story seemed to take tangible form. On August 20th, 2 independent researchers, German Andreas Richter and Polish Piotr Koper, claimed to have located the legendary Nazi gold train using ground-penetrating radar. They claimed the convoy was hidden about 50 meters underground, in a mountainous area of Lower Silesia, where the Third Reich developed underground complexes during the war. The announcement caused an immediate impact. International media outlets took up the story, and for the first time in decades, local speculation gained institutional traction. The discoverers announced their discovery through a lawyer, and from the outset demanded a reward equivalent to 10% of the value of the contents if the train's existence was confirmed. To support their claim, they published an image of the KS-700 ground-penetrating radar on their website. The image showed an elongated silhouette that, according to them, corresponded to an armored train between 120 and 150 meters long. Just a few days later, Poland's Deputy Minister of Culture at the time, Piotr Żuchowski, made a forceful statement. After reviewing preliminary data and receiving technical reports, he claimed to be 99% convinced that the train had indeed been found. However, he clarified that there was no conclusive evidence that it was loaded with gold, as the legend had it. The excitement, however, quickly subsided. By mid-December, several experts from the Technical and Scientific Institute of the University of Krakow denied the initial euphoria. At a press conference held on the 15th of that month, Professor Janusz Made summarized the results of the independent analysis. There could have been an underground structure, perhaps a tunnel, but there was no evidence of the presence of a train. Despite the denial, the stir generated was considerable. For weeks, local authorities, foreign press and curious onlookers remained attentive to a discovery that for a moment seemed to turn a myth into a documentable fact. The expectation generated by the alleged find soon surpassed any expectations. The city of Wałbrzych, formerly known as Waldenburg, became the epicenter of an unprecedented movement of treasure hunters, curious onlookers, and international journalists. Local authorities quickly organized a commission charged with granting exploration permits in the area. Even the discoverers of the alleged train, Richter and Koper, announced plans to found a museum dedicated to the discovery. The Polish army joined the operation, not so much out of archaeological interest, but rather because of the possibility that the area contained explosive remnants from the Second World War. However, as the excavations progressed, critical voices began to be heard. Wisław Nawrocki, a researcher at the Institute for Process Optimization in Krakow, dismissed the ground-penetrating radar image published by the discoverers as a crude fabrication. Meanwhile, German historian Ingo Loos of the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich dismissed the story as mere conjecture. Speaking to Stern magazine, he stated, "I'll only believe it when I see the train with my own eyes." Despite the skepticism, there were compelling reasons not to completely rule out the hypothesis. For decades, a story circulated in Silesia that, between late 1944 and early 1945, the National Socialist authorities confiscated gold from the city of Breslau, now Rockwar, and loaded it, along with jewelry and documents, onto an armoured train that never reached its destination. With the Soviet advance and the imminent collapse of the Eastern Front, this shipment was reportedly sent to the western part of the Reich. Shortly after, the war ended, and the Allies assigned Silesia to Poland as compensation for territorial losses in the east. Some argued that the convoy disappeared near Książ Castle, just 3 kilometers from Wałbrzych, as Słowikowski claimed. Others pointed to the hills near Pieczowicz, based on a document seen by businessman Posibirski. The other element that fueled the possibility of a hidden train was the surroundings themselves. The Owl Mountains contain the remains of the Ries project, a fortified tunnel system whose purpose was never fully clarified. It is known that the Third Reich planned to establish an underground headquarters, military factories, and strategic shelters there, with Książ Castle as the centerpiece of the complex. None of these structures were completed. The Riesa system, consisting of 7 unfinished facilities, was built under inhumane conditions by prisoners from the Gross-Rosen concentration camp and its subcamps. According to records from the foundation that preserves the memorial site, at least 13,587 people lost their lives during its construction. Despite growing controversy and skepticism from the scientific community, authorities authorized further inspections. In November 2015, 2 independent studies were carried out, one led by Piotr Koper and Andreas Richter, and another by the Krakow Academy of Mining and Metallurgy, under the direction of Janusz Madej. On December 15th, this second team reported that there was no trace of hidden trains. They only identified anomalies consistent with geological formations, or, at best, a collapsed tunnel. Madej bluntly criticized the search's persistence, stating that making mistakes is understandable, but persisting in error is another matter. A third analysis, conducted by the AGH University of Science and Technology in Krakow, reached similar conclusions. No signs of any trains were detected underground. Even so, with the encouragement of private investors, preparations for excavation continued throughout 2016. In April of that same year, the local council received a 10-page anonymous letter. The document included detailed maps, technical coordinates, and the statement of a supposed witness who claimed to have seen 3 trains hidden behind a metal gate on a hidden railway branch. The authorities considered the information consistent and reliable. However, the sender did not submit a formal application, and according to current legislation, any excavation in areas at risk of war remnants had to be approved by the Monument Protection Office. On August 15, 2016, the official excavation began. 64 professionals participated, including geologists, archaeologists, chemists, engineers, and explosives experts. The operation cost a total of $131,000. 7 days later, it was cancelled. No convoy, no railway infrastructure, and no evidence of human activity were found. Koper and Richter publicly admitted that the radar image was actually a natural formation of ice and rock. Despite the failure, Wałbrzych experienced an unexpected tourism boom. Visitor numbers soared by 44%, and the media coverage was estimated to have generated publicity benefits worth over $200 million. There was even a discussion about dedicating a rotunda to the 2 explorers. At the end of 2016, Koper and Richter announced the creation of a foundation to fund further research. In June 2017, together with a geophysical firm from Warsaw, they identified 7 underground cavities that could correspond to tunnels, with a budget of €25,000 for exploratory drilling. Although the survey was scheduled for 2018, Richter withdrew from the project that same year. Koper, however, continued. In January 2019, during work on a palace in Struga, he discovered 16th-century frescoes hidden behind a wall, a significant find from a heritage perspective, but with no connection to the enigmatic Nazi gold train. After the failure of formal excavations in 2016 and the withdrawal of one of the project's driving forces, new critical voices emerged. One of them was Igor Prelin, a former member of Soviet intelligence. In an interview with the Daily Mail, he claimed not to give any credence to the hypothesis of a hidden Nazi train in Silesia. According to his testimony, both the Red Army and the USSR secret services carried out multiple searches in the area between 1945 and the fall of the communist bloc, without finding any traces of any buried convoy. However, Prelin introduced a more disturbing perspective. He considered it plausible that, if a hidden train did indeed exist, its contents were not ingots or valuable objects, but human remains. In his opinion, the underground tunnels were not designed to store riches, but to facilitate the clandestine transport of prisoners during the Nazi regime, especially to the nearby Gross-Rosen concentration camp. Meanwhile, the Ries project remains a mystery. The complex, still unexplored, fuels various interpretations. Some researchers maintain that part of the train, or its supposed cargo, may still be hidden beneath the rubble. Others, however, consider the story to be part of a cultural phenomenon born from the trauma of war, the attraction to the secrets of the Third Reich, and the economy of myth. Regardless of its veracity, the legend left a visible mark on the region. It has led to documentary productions, publications, academic research, and even tourism initiatives. In Wałbrzych, the story of the train has generated employment, income, and a local identity built on mystery. The lack of definitive evidence has not stopped those who still keep the search alive. If the convoy's existence were ever confirmed, the Polish state would become the legal owner of its contents. However, the World Jewish Congress has intervened to remind everyone that if gold, jewelry, or valuables are found, they most likely come from Nazi plunder against Jewish citizens. In the words of Robert Singer, its Director General, it would be essential to take all necessary measures to ensure that these objects are returned to their rightful owners or descendants. Discovery of Nazi gold in Spain. During the height of World War II, the Canfranc train station, located in the Aragonese Pyrenees, experienced its busiest years. It was between 1942 and 1943, after reopening following its closure due to the Civil War, that this crossing became a key hub for rail traffic between Spain and the rest of Europe. The Irun line was under German control, and the Port-Bou line had been temporarily closed due to flooding. This left Canfranc as the only direct route through which Spain could maintain trade with other countries during those years. During that period, more than 86 tons of gold, brought from Switzerland, moved through this station. Of that amount, more than 12 tons remained in Spanish territory, while the remaining 74 tons were sent to Portugal. The gold did not always travel by train. Trucks with Swiss license plates also arrived, whose drivers rested in nearby accommodations, such as the Hotel Morocco and the Hotel Ara, right in the Los Arañones area, where the international station was located. From there, the ingots were transported by road to Lisbon, and from the Portuguese capital, sent back to Bern. This route was used to transport much of the gold the Nazis had stolen from both occupied countries and concentration camp victims. This same route was also used to ship minerals such as tungsten and iron from Spain and Portugal, which were essential for the continued operation of Hitler's weapons industry. In exchange for these metals, more Nazi-looted gold arrived, which had been laundered in Swiss banks to appear legal. This exchange was confirmed by a series of documents found decades later at the same Canfranc station. They were discovered by a French citizen named Jonathan Diaz, who rescued them when they were already half destroyed and forgotten. With the closure of the railway tunnel in 1970 and the disappearance of the customs office in 1992, this facility was abandoned. The service was eliminated as part of the new policies of free movement within the European Union. But much more was lost with it. Canfranc ceased to be a strategic point, a hidden exit between mountains that was once key to the traffic of goods and to feeding half of Europe in the midst of war. Above the Canfranc coat of arms, you can still read the ancient right of rota y porta, a royal privilege granted in the 15th century. It allowed its inhabitants to charge for each load or herd that crossed its bridge. The town had once had its own customs office, where taxes were already being collected for the passage of goods even before the station. In the Middle Ages, between the 11th and 12th centuries, the so-called Campum Francum already existed there, a crossing point with a mill, a currency exchange office, and accommodation for pilgrims who made the Camino de Santiago crossing Somport instead of Roncesvalles. The discovery of the key documents came unexpectedly. Jonathan Diaz, a bus driver of Spanish origin who worked on the Oloron-Canfranc line for a French company, used to take advantage of his free time between trips to stroll through the ruined station. It was a rainy day in November 2000 when he decided to enter the old station, as he had done before, but this time something different caught his attention: a pile of papers scattered among the abandoned cars. Among them, he found a sheet of paper with the seal of the Spanish Ministry of Finance and the phrase, "Importation of gold bars." He took the sheets home, somewhat damp and old, and upon reviewing them, he saw that they were related to the passage of gold during the 1940s. That night he could barely sleep. He thought that if he left them there, the rain would finish them off. Despite the bad weather and the fear of police checkpoints, he decided to go back for more. He packed thick clothing, a flashlight and garbage bags into his car and headed back to the station at night. The station was empty. The wind and the river were barely audible. He walked through the underground access, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the walls. He didn't turn on his flashlight until he was sure no one was watching. He gathered all the documents he could, put them in black bags, and decided to hide them near the village church among the bushes to collect them calmly the next day. That night he returned to Oloron, feeling like he had rescued something big. The next day he returned early, collected the bags, and took them home. He spent hours drying, sorting, and cleaning the documents, which were deteriorating with age. They were copies on thin paper of official communications from Canfranc customs with Madrid. Some were chewed, others torn, and many were glued together. Despite their condition, Jonathan managed to reconstruct much of the content. What he was reading matched what some of the town's elders had told him. Years before, station workers had told him they moved gold under the watchful eye of German soldiers, French gendarmes, and civil guards. They transported it from the French side of the station to the Spanish side through an underground passageway, then loaded it onto Swiss trucks. The scene came to mind every time he passed those abandoned tracks. Now he had proof that it was real. He began searching for information about gold trafficking during the war. On the internet, he only found references to a few trucks that passed through Hendaye or the Swiss border. The official archives mentioned little about the subject. He then decided to ask the residents of Canfranc, especially the older ones, although it wasn't easy. Many didn't want to talk. They were afraid of the memory. Some asked him if sharing what they knew could bring them trouble. Jonathan noticed that there was still fear in the air, even after so many years. Franco's regime had left a strong mark on that area. Canfranc, during the post-war period, was seen as a privileged place, bustling with activity, where goods arrived that were unseen in the rest of the country. It was an island within a Spain impoverished by ration cards. The silence about what happened there was no coincidence. Little by little, some older residents of Canfranc began to open up. Jonathan managed to get them to tell him more details about the passage of the gold and what life was like at the station during the war years. Some assured him that there were still documents stored in private homes, but no one wanted to take them out. Others told him that what he had found was only a fraction of everything that had happened there, and that many other things had been lost or deliberately hidden. Surveillance in the town during the post-war period was very tight. Living there was only allowed with special permission. The police demanded guarantees from trusted individuals and monitored everyone who moved through the area. Canfranc was within the security zone of the Franco regime. To visit the station, even for a few days, a safe conduct pass was required. Control was absolute, as if it were a military zone. One of the documents Jonathan found detailed that the police had to identify, within 8 days, any person living in Los Arañones who had not been there since July 18, 1936. If they were not a civil servant or could not prove their employment, they had to be expelled. This ensured that only people loyal to the regime could be in a place where so many valuable goods passed through. Eventually, Jonathan's discovery came to light. Renfe, which had left the station in a state of disrepair, reacted badly. Instead of expressing its gratitude for the recovery of these documents, it reported the station for misappropriation, considering that the documents remained the property of the company. They demanded that he return them. A court case was opened in Jaca. Meanwhile, secretly, they also attempted to negotiate with him. The Frenchman never denied that he had taken the documents, but he insisted that they were abandoned, wet, lying on the floor, uncared for. For years, no one from Renfe had protected or archived them. He had simply saved them from total deterioration. Many townspeople supported him. They knew that if it weren't for him, all that material would have been lost forever. Thanks to those papers, it was discovered that between 1942 and 1943, more than 86 tons of Swiss gold passed through Canfranc, some of which ended up in the hands of the Franco regime, and some continued on to Lisbon. The gold, often stolen from Jews or banks occupied by the Nazis, was exchanged for tungsten and other metals that came from Spanish and Portuguese mines. These materials were essential for Germany to continue manufacturing weapons. The documents detailed dates, quantities, routes and companies involved. Most of the transport was done in Swiss trucks entering through Canfranc. The precious metal arrived from Switzerland, passed through unoccupied French territory, crossed the Pyrenees at this station, and continued on to Madrid or Lisbon. It was a long but safe route, far from Allied bombing and checkpoints. Traffic through Canfranc was so intense that the station moved more than 1,000 tons of goods daily in both directions. It was the busiest crossing in the country. Whatever couldn't be moved through Irun or Port-Bou passed through there. The town's economic activity grew so much that the population doubled. Hotels were full, businesses were open, and restaurants were operating day and night. It was a world apart, while the rest of Spain lived with hunger and scarcity. Years later, when Jonathan had already made everything public, it was learned that many more historic papers were still in the postal dock, a warehouse separate from the main station building. They were in broken baskets, damp, piled haphazardly. Town residents tried to collect some to prevent them from being lost. Many had been eaten by rats or soaked by snow that entered through broken glass. That warehouse also contained remnants of the international customs activity: letters, telegrams, invoices, postal shipment data, and traveller records. All of this, which told the true story of what happened in Canfranc, was almost lost without anyone noticing. The station itself was used for years as a set for commercials and films, with nothing inside protected. The gold of the Third Reich passed through Canfranc, and the world ignored it for more than half a century. Jonathan Diaz's accidental discovery not only brought forgotten documents to light, but also revived interest in a silenced part of history. Today, it is known with certainty that that mountain station, surrounded by snow and hidden among the mountains, was one of the key points through which part of the wealth stolen by the Nazi regime was moved. A secret route between Switzerland, Spain and Portugal, in which several governments, private companies and international agents collaborated. Gold, in the end, didn't just buy weapons, it also bought silence. Discovery of Nazi gold in the Netherlands. In January 2023, the Dutch National Archives published thousands of documents from World War II that had been stored for decades. Among them was a hand-drawn map by a German soldier, marking with an X the alleged location where the Nazis had buried a shipment of gold. The indicated site was on the outskirts of a small town called Ommeren in the center of the country. The piece of paper immediately caused an uproar. The map included notes and lines indicating roads and trees as landmarks. It stated that boxes containing gold coins, jewelry, precious stones and other valuables had been hidden there at that exact spot. The information was not new to everyone. As early as 1947, Dutch authorities had heard of such a treasure and searched for it without success, but the matter was shelved. With the official publication of the map, the story came to public light for the first time. The map had been handed over by a former German soldier who claimed to have personally witnessed how the boxes were buried during the final months of the war. He claimed the gold came from a bank or savings bank office in Arnhem and was hidden on the orders of Nazi officials before the Allies arrived. The map was found in an old file code-coded 1947/32, which also contained interrogation reports on the former German soldier, intelligence notes, and letters between various officials. Everything indicated that, at the end of the war, a small group of soldiers hid 3 boxes full of stolen objects. The goal was to prevent them from falling into the hands of the Allied forces. Dutch authorities had already attempted to find this treasure. In 1947, they excavated the same location marked on the map, but found nothing. There was no advanced technology like ground-penetrating radar or drones, just shovels, basic plans and eyewitness accounts. After several days of work without results, the case was closed and the papers were stored in the state archives. Decades later, when the documents were released in 2023 as part of an annual declassification, the map captured the attention of the international media. People from all over the country began to take an interest in the story. Some came to the village with metal detectors, others with shovels ready to search on their own. But the land was protected. It was part of a natural area and could only be excavated with official permission. The Omeran Historical Foundation then asked the authorities for a serious, supervised excavation. They didn't want curious people destroying the natural environment or illegal prospectors appearing. The municipality accepted the request, and an archaeological intervention was organized with the help of the Netherlands Institute for Cultural Heritage. The official excavation in Omeran began on May 1, 2023. The site, a green area surrounded by trees near the village, was fenced off for security. Professional archaeologists, national heritage technicians, and members of the municipal service participated. They brought specialized machinery, subsurface scanners, and systems to detect buried metal objects. The work lasted several days. Several trenches were excavated at points that coincided with the markings on the original map. The teams worked carefully, monitoring each layer of soil to avoid damaging any potential hidden objects. Samples were collected, terrain profiles were photographed, and detailed records were taken for every meter surveyed. The area had changed over time. Trees that had been on the map no longer existed. The ground was wetter and softer from the spring rains. Even so, the archaeologists located the locations that matched the former soldiers' instructions. In total, at least 3 search areas were opened, deep enough to detect any type of buried box or structure, but nothing turned up. No coins, no jewelry, no remains of wood or rusty metal to indicate anything had been buried. The result was negative. The team concluded that if there had ever been a cache at that spot, nothing remained. One possibility is that someone had unearthed the boxes many years earlier, perhaps during the 1947 search efforts or even later, without it being officially recorded. Another possibility is that the map was wrong, or that the soldier's testimony was inaccurate. He could have exaggerated what he saw or misremembered the exact location after so many years. It's also possible that the objects were never buried, or that they were moved to another location after the war. There's no way to know for sure. Despite not finding the treasure, the authorities considered the investigation valid. The excavation was carried out with all official permits and procedures. No historical artifacts were found, but it was considered a closed case from an archaeological point of view. The map will remain part of the public archive and can be consulted by anyone interested. During the days of the search, dozens of journalists visited Omeran. Fences were put up to keep cameras out. Some residents took the opportunity to share what they knew, while others avoided talking about it. The town, quiet most of the year, became the center of media attention from around the world for a few days. Stories were published in English, Spanish, German, and Dutch. The case sparked a debate about what to do with such stories. Many wondered whether the search for the treasure should continue, or whether it was better to leave it in the past. Some archaeologists said it was most likely that, if it ever existed, it had already been recovered. Others believe it could still be there, but at a greater depth or at another nearby location. The fact is that the map exists, the testimony also exists, and there are official documents to back it up. But for now, there is no gold. All that was found was a mixture of disturbed earth, some old roots, and many unanswered questions. After the excavation, the map became an object of historical curiosity. It was drawn in pencil on yellowed paper. It had hand-marked lines, some road names, and the mark of an X where the boxes were said to have been buried. The handwriting was that of a German who, according to the archives, had been interrogated by Dutch officials in 1946 and 1947. His statement formed the basis for everything attempted afterward. Those documents also mentioned that the gold could have come from a bank branch in Arnhem that was looted during the fighting in the winter of 1944. The story goes that, as German troops began to retreat, some officers decided to hide the valuables they couldn't take with them. They chose a quiet, memorable location outside the city, a rural area in Omeran. The map remained in the Dutch archives for over 75 years. Only a small group of people knew it existed. It wasn't made public until the mass declassification in January 2023, when thousands of war-related documents were released. This event is common in the Netherlands. Every year, new war period archives are opened for public inspection. The reaction was immediate. The map went viral. It was featured in media outlets such as the BBC, CNN, Reuters, and The Guardian. It was also shared by local channels such as NOS and Omroep Gelderland. On social media, some began to theorize, comparing the case to adventure films. Others posted routes or coordinates, trying to find matches on Google Maps. But the authorities were clear from the start. The search could only be conducted under official supervision. The land where the treasure was marked belongs to the local government and is within a protected area. Private excavations are not permitted. Furthermore, technicians warned of a possible risk from unexploded explosives from World War II that could still be underground. The Netherlands Institute for Cultural Heritage considered the case to have been handled correctly. The treasure was not found, but a serious, documented and respectful search was conducted. The experts reminded everyone that in archaeology, it's not always about finding objects, but rather confirming facts. In this case, it was confirmed that the site was examined and that there is no evidence that the gold is still there. In the village of Omeren, life returned to normal. Some residents believe the story is true and that the treasure was already removed decades ago. Others think it never existed. Still, others see it all as a local legend that grew over time. But the map is still there, scanned, catalogued and available for anyone to review. What this case revealed was more than a search for gold. It showed how a forgotten piece of paper in an archive can reactivate stories from the past. It also demonstrated that interest in the traces of the Third Reich remains alive and that there are still unfinished chapters from that era. Nazi gold, real or not, returned to the news thanks to a map drawn almost 80 years ago. For now, there is no gold in Omeren, only disturbed earth, a disturbing story, and a cross on an old piece of paper that continues to circulate around the world.